And welcome back, everybody. Another edition here of Fridays with Phillip on the Auburn Undercover podcast. Joined this evening by, of course, Phillip Marshall, and Jason Caldwell is on with us tonight as well. Guys moving in here, getting toward the end of the second week of a fall camp. Sort of, the first week, I guess you would say, first full week as they went through day 6. Tomorrow on Friday will be day 7. Then sort of a scrimmage type setting on Saturday. Going to be a stadium practice. Don't think it's going to be a full-blown scrimmage, but there's going to be some scrimmage type stuff there. And so they're getting into the thick of it now. Of course, the season is just right around the corner. And Phillip, you had a story today on Derek Nix, the offensive coordinator. I thought that was really good. I enjoyed getting to sit down with him today. We got to talk to all of the offensive assistants. Just your takeaways, Phillip, from getting to have that conversation with Derek. And, we wanted to talk a lot about the offense on tonight's show, and obviously they're hoping that the addition of somebody Freeze is familiar with will get this thing moving in the right direction, or help get this thing moving in the right direction.
Of course, he is an extraordinarily impressive man. I mean, he really is, and all you have to do is talk to players, talk to other coaches, and they'll all tell you the same thing. I think he's invaluable. And I can see why he tried to hire him on his first staff and couldn't get it done, and why he brought him in. That's all wonderful. But as with every coach and every player, it comes down to what happens on the field. And, and I know Jason had a story today about, or Thursday, I'll get it right, I'm old, about what Ken Austin had to say about Peyton Thorne. And it's very similar to what he told me when I sat down with him in the spring, just about his ability to grasp things. And so that's hopeful. But again, all of them comes down to what happens on the field when it's time to play.
Yeah, I mean, it was – Jason, I thought your assessment of Ken Austin and sort of the way he likes to deliver information, it's almost like getting in a college class and sitting with a professor. I mean, he is so detailed about the quarterback position.
I want people to watch the video today. It's 15 minutes, and it is 15 minutes of a lecture. I mean, no matter what subject it was, you would feel like you were back in a lecture hall in college and listen to a professor tell you, hey, here, I mean, you're like, quantum physics, all those things were way over my head. I mean, I couldn't even come close to, but he delivers a quarterback thought. And it's such a position now that it takes all those things. And we're going to talk about Cam Newton and Nick Marshall and all these guys a little bit later. But to be able to play the position now, you can still do it if you're extraordinarily athletic. But sooner or later, you're going to have to figure out what the defense is doing. How do you adjust to it? Do all these things to get and to listen to him talk about the importance of that pre-snap. And he's like, look, if you're Phillip, we've been talking about this for years, and Ken Austin said it today. He said, if you're adjusting to the defense, then they've already won. And we've been saying that for a long time, is that, dude, you better make them adjust to you. You better make them adapt to what you're doing, or you're going to lose. And he said the same thing as a quarterback. He said, look, if you're reacting to what the defense is doing instead of anticipating what they're going to do, then you've already lost. And I thought that was really interesting to listen to. And it plays into so much about what we've heard about Peyton Thorne. And now being back in this system that he knows inside and out. He grew up playing in this system, and you can see the pieces. You're right. It's got to come together on the field, because it takes more than just that guy. Everybody else has to be on the same page. But you can see that they feel like they've got a guy that can put them in the right positions if everybody else will come along.
Jason Campbell told me one time, I think it was in 2003, and he kind of laughed. He said, sometimes I think people think the quarterback's the only player out there. And
good or bad.
And there's a lot of truth to that. And, it's like coaches, you get a lot more praise than most people, and you get a lot more criticism than most people. But my first impression talking to Ken Austin in the spring, when I'd sat down with him for a good while, was this guy is brilliant. he is just an extraordinarily intelligent person, and he loves Hugh Freeze. I mean, he came here as not even an on the field coach, and it's ironic. I think he pointed out today I was talking to him about Derek, and at Ole Miss, he was an offensive coordinator, and Derek was the running back coach.
Yep.
And that would have the potential, I think, a lot of places to be kind of uncomfortable. But as I wrote about today, I don't sense any discomfort at all from Ken Austin or from Derek. And Marcus Davis talked about how much he had learned from him already, and the players just seem to swear by him. So it's I know this. There'll be a lot more comfort with what they're doing and how they're doing it this year than there ever was last year.
Yep. And talking about a guy like Bourne, I mean, we've heard it from all his teammates this preseason, and I'm interested to hear after Saturday. I don't think we'll hear it on Saturday, but moving into next week, what that sort of manifests itself in live situations. But everything the coaches were saying today, I mean, it's all the same. It's all copy and paste from what the players have said all throughout the preseason, is that there's just that level of comfort for him, just that level of confidence. So much of it comes from the receiving core. And I enjoyed getting to talk to Marcus Davis today. I mean, I thought it was interesting. Jason, you and I were talking about it earlier today. Like, when you get to thinking about it, I wrote about it today. It's going to take a village to get these receivers developed the right way. Like, this is a big task. This is not the defining whatever of the Freeze era, but like this is a big stepping stone, I think, for this coaching staff. What are Cam Coleman and Perry Thompson going to look like at Auburn? Marcus Davis brought it up. He said there are 4 guys on this coaching staff who have coached receivers at the FBS level. Of course, you have Marcus. Derek Nix was most recently the receivers coach at Ole Miss. Hugh Freeze coached receivers for a year at Ole Miss. And then Maurice Harris, Maurice Harris, who was an co-offensive coordinator and wide receivers coach at Liberty, a guy that Freeze thought about bringing on his staff last year. And now he's in that off-the-field role, and off-the-field role that's even bigger now because of those NCAA rules passed where he can be on the field. And so Marcus Davis said, man, I've got a great support staff here. Like, Marcus has done a great job since taking over at Auburn, both recruiting and as a coach, but I think it's nice for him now to be able to, particularly Derek Nix, a guy who's just worked with receivers at Ole Miss, lean on him. And he said, look, I pick his brain every single day because that's a big part of things, is developing those 2 wide receivers the right way.
Oh, I think Marcus is well aware, it seems to me, that he's going to listen to other people who have been at it longer than he has, and doesn't resent that at all. And I talked to Peyton Thorne's daddy, I guess, during the spring, who was a coach and played quarterback in college. And I asked him, was there ever a time when all the criticism was so hot and heavy, and was there ever a time when Peyton thought about just saying, well, that's it, I've had enough, I'm going to move on? And he said, no. He said, the first thing he told me was, I'm not going to leave like that, like last season.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so I think he's really got a different kind of attitude. I think just and this is something we're going to talk about in a minute, but, he got caught in a head coach / offensive coordinator situation that made it a lot harder for him. You got running Phillip Montgomery's offense, which is part of Hugh Freeze's offense, and they're not necessarily seeing eye to eye. And the quarterback rotation. And the thing that I felt the worst for him last year is they would put Robbie Ashford in, and then it'd be 3rd and 7, and then they'd put him back in when everybody on the field knew he was going to throw the ball. And
with no wide receivers that were going to make a play.
No, and he didn't even have any confidence that they were going to be in the right place to make a play, even if they could.
To me, that's almost more than the offense stuff was just the lack of playmakers at wide receiver. How difficult that makes it on a quarterback. I told Nathan, I ran into Peyton a couple of days ago. I was walking to my car. He was coming back from lunch or something. And I asked him, I was like, how different does it feel? He just started smiling. He didn't have to say anything else. It's all of a sudden when you don't have to be perfect to make a play, all you got to do is just get the ball to somebody else and let them make a play because you believe they can do it. Whereas last year this has to be perfect. And sometimes it was perfect and it still didn't matter.
Right.
That's one of the things that jumps out to me. Another thing too, Nathan mentioned it. It made me think of this before I forget it. Talk about these young wide receivers. And it always brings me back, and I know we're going to go back to 2003 and 2004. It brings me back to Ben Obamanu, Courtney Taylor, Devin Aromashadu, Anthony Mix. It brings me back to that group because of the athletic. The one difference is these guys now come in so much more advanced than those guys did. I mean, Cam Coleman is as advanced as a freshman wide receivers can be. The other guys aren't there. He's as advanced as it gets, mainly because he played for Patrick Nix. He's already played in a college system. They played 7-on-7, do all this stuff, but he is already. That was the thing too, that when you try to explain to people in the spring, here's why he's different. He's different because he is already ready for that. And now he's physically ready for that. And I thought one of the funny things today was, Derek Nix, they're talking about these young guys like it's water off a duck's back for these guys. Like they just play because they've played so much. This is not new. Now it's a different level, and it's going to be different when they get in games. But for them, it's like, hey, we'll just go play. And I think about, Cadillac as a freshman, and I think about you find a few of these guys.
Right.
But when you start recruiting at a different level, you find more and more of those guys.
Yeah, right.
And now you look at this class and you go, there's a few more of those guys right now, where it's Jamonte Waller or it's DeMarcus Riddick, and look in the secondary, those wide receivers. All of a sudden you go, there's a few more of those guys that go, I don't care. I'm ready to compete right now. That's what you have. You got to have that.
Those are the guys you have to have if you're going to contend for championship.
That's it.
And I don't know this team's ready to do that, but they're certainly
they were a year ago.
No doubt about that. And it's funny when you think about last season. I was thinking about this the other day that if you show up against New Mexico State, you win. If you show up against Maryland, you win. You should have beaten Alabama. Ifs and nuts.
Yeah.
But if those things had happened like they should have, they'd have been 9-3 last season, and that would have been one of the most remarkable records ever in Auburn history. Had that happened.
Yeah.
I think now it's just clearly these coaches are much tighter, much closer knit, much more attached to the head coach, and it's just a question really of we got to see if Peyton Thorne can take what he's shown at practice onto the field. I don't really have any reason to believe he won't. He's certainly not scared, and keep the right people healthy. Then who knows?
Yeah, I talked to Marcus Davis about it today. I was kind of interested to know with a guy like Keandre Lambert-Smith. Yeah, that's somebody Thorne talked about over and over again in the summer of the stuff they did that they were doing off the field. I'm kind of asking Marcus about it. I was like, I know you're not there when the players do that stuff, but sort of what are the tangible things you can notice on the field? And it was interesting. Marcus said it's not even the playmaking. Like, it's not even what they do throwing the ball. He said, I'm more interested watching them the first couple of days of practice when the play's over, the communication aspect of things. Marcus said that's the most important thing. Watching Peyton go over to Keandre, and they're talking about the route, and they're talking about the play and the playbook and the drill, all that kind of stuff. They've been doing it all summer. And I think that was the value, not to pivot to a guy like Keandre, but that was more that was what Marcus talked about today with Keandre. They sort of pitched that to him this offseason. Look, Marcus said it for what it is. He said he was basically an NFL free agent. Like, a bunch of people wanted him, and he could have gone to a lot of different places. Part of their pitch was, yes, you're going to come in here and get the ball, but you're also going to come in here and be sort of a mentor to these younger players. That was something he embraced. Robert Lewis, I think, is really under the radar, important piece of that room as well. I was thinking, Jason, when you're talking about the players they did or didn't have at receiver, the best one, or the most explosive one, Javarius Johnson, was hurt for a lot of the year.
Yeah.
So to have a guy like that in the slot, maybe like a Rob Lewis, to be sort of a leader of that group, I think it's sort of maybe being undervalued right now. So I'm interested. I'm interested to see what comes out of maybe more of these live sessions with these receivers as we get closer to it being the real thing.
It's a really interesting room. You mentioned those two guys. If people haven't watched the Sam Jackson video from a couple of days ago, it tags along with Ken Austin in a different way, because he's talking about Peyton Thorne a lot, but he talks about how he understands it because he's a former quarterback, and we've seen how important that is. And those two guys room together, and all these intangibles at this wide receiver room. And then you have the young guys that come in, and all the old guys, instead of being, I don't want those guys out of here. They may take my job. You don't see that. You see those guys are going to make us better. And that's the thing that really jumps out to me right now is that it is all about the team. And I think this coaching staff has done a good job of that, going, look, hey, we're going to play a bunch of different guys. We're going to roll a bunch of guys out there. We're going to win. Yeah, and I know we talked to Jarquez Hunter, and he wants to be 1,000-yard rusher, and who wouldn't? I mean, I'm sure Cam Coleman or Robert Lewis, whoever, would want to be 1,000-yard receiver too. But I think they also understand the most important thing is winning football games. And you hear that and you see that in the way these guys kind of respond. And so, but yeah, getting back to your thoughts, I don't know that we'll see a ton of it Saturday. With it, being kind of open, there'll be some on to victory and people. I don't think that we're going to see a ton of the stuff. Hugh Freeze told me the other day, he said, look, I'm not going to go out there and show a bunch of things, especially early. I think we'll see the young guys. I think this will be who is ready, who do we need to push, and what do they need to do to get there. I think you'll see more maybe Perry and Malcolm and some of those young guys in the secondary and some of the backups on the offensive line, defensive line. Okay, is TJ Lindsey ready? All right, Darren Reed, here these. Okay, who's ready to go? I think we'll see more of that in this kind of one. And then probably next week, it'll be a big one for especially, Nathan, you talked about it today. What quarterback is going to step up into that number 2 role behind Peyton Thorne and get those reps? That's going to be one of the biggest things of this entire camp. Yeah,
I mean, that would make sense too if it was pivoted more to guys farther down the depth chart or just younger guys that they're looking to see. Because if a guy like a Hank Brown and a Holden Guerin are out there throwing the ball for them, I mean, yeah, look, I thought it was funny. People were talking about on the board the usage of the phrase gun to my head, because Ken Austin said, gun to my head. They're actually pretty much the same. So he basically saying couldn't make a decision between Holden Guerin and Hank Brown. No surprise. I mean, it's not with Walker White at that number 4 spot. Like, I just think I don't think it's any sort of indictment on him or anything. I think Free said it in the spring. Like, he was like, he's the 4th guy because of his inexperience. And Free said it's going to be really hard for him to come out of there just because we want to develop him the right way. And as Ken Austin said today, we say it every year, this time of year, when there's anything to do with quarterbacks, there's just not enough reps. Not enough reps to go around. And within the next few days, they're going to start cutting them down. And you and I have talked about it here before. That number 2 job is very important.
Yes.
Because Peyton Thorne is very important. So if you lose him, you got to make sure that other guy is developed the right way.
Very important. And it also, because of that, the quicker you can get to your second guy, the more reps you can get him in camp. Because here's kind of the misnomer, and people have thought about it for years. Is like, well, that number 2 quarterback, he's getting those reps in practice. Not really. He's not really getting many. He's watching, and you better get a lot of mental reps. But when you get into the season, your number 2 quarterback's not getting a ton of reps. Now he'll get a few, and he'll, but you're not getting it with a one offense, and you're not getting it with that group. And so this is the time when you can build something with a second quarterback to give them a little chance to get some reps and to get some scrimmage reps. Because once you get to the season, hopefully you can play them in 2 or 3 games early in the year and get some reps and get some live reps. And that would be very vital for him. But yeah, the quicker you can get to a second guy, the more reps you can get him to get as further along as possible before you get into a season and where you start to really game plan.
My apologies, guys.
You're good.
Hampton Inn Internet suddenly decided it was time to jump off. So I had to go through my phone to get the internet. So anyway, I apologize.
We're good.
One of the things I wanted to talk about was about, if you look back to, a lot of people like to think Auburn has had all these quarterback issues. And if you look back to, if you look back starting with Cam, he was obviously a great NFL quarterback. They have 2 NFL quarterbacks actually competing with each other in Denver right now, and Jarrett Stidham and Bo Nix. And they had Nick Marshall, who was not an NFL quarterback, but who almost took him to the national championship. And I got my thoughts about it. Jason, we talked about it some before, but it just seems like, and a lot of times, I mean, they were really, really good on offense again. Some people don't remember this in 2014. But they when you look at it, it's kind of startling to even see, after they beat LSU 41-7, the only time they broke 30 points on, or the only team they beat after that was, I think that's right, was Samford. And because they couldn't stop anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of interesting, because I remember talking to Ellis Johnson, and he said, I'm afraid this is because the defense had played really well through that LSU game. Of course, LSU came in there with a freshman quarterback who's with big eyes, but he said, I'm afraid this is fool's gold. And he was right. It was. And but, you've had a number of problems. I think the 2017 season, and this comes from what both of them told me, both Gus and Chip Lindsey. After they blew a 20-point lead at LSU, Gus told Chip, said, I'm getting out of your way. And he did. And they scored 40-plus points in 6 out of 8 SEC games. They were really, really good. Jarrett Stidham was really, really good. The next year, it was not but a few games before Gus and Chip, and it's amazing because Chip's working for him again now. But Chip was totally frustrated. So frustrated he left and went to Kansas. And Jarrett Stidham was just, at media days, was just totally excited because they had told him that a lot of it was going to be on him. He was going to be able to check and do those things. And that didn't happen either. And he was unhappy. He was kind of caught in the middle. And so what as it turned out, 2018, really, if you want to look at an underachieving team, that's probably the most underachieving team in Gus's time at Auburn, I think. And then, of course, then after that, Bo was freshman of the year in 2019, and they had a good team. They won 9 games, and probably could have won 1 or 2 more. But then the whole COVID year, and then it was another offensive coordinator and another uncomfortable situation with the head coach and the offensive coordinator. And it was the COVID year. And then, of course, Brian Harsin hit town, and it was a mess. But now, Jason, you pointed out when we were talking earlier, and I think it's very true, that some of those issues were caused by lack of talent, for lack of a better word, on the offensive line.
Yeah, and it did. 2018 was still a group that had some guys, and that was it's the outlier in all of those, because you still had Prince Tega and Jack Driscoll, and you had Marquel Harrell and Mike Horton. You had a lot of
good players,
offensive line. Yeah, that's really the outlier. The thing that, and I talked about this earlier this week with somebody, that because of the issues, because of the back and forth and all those things, other than Nick Marshall from 2013 to 2014, there hasn't been a quarterback that got better after year one.
No,
there has not. It's just been kind of the same.
I don't know that Nick got any better. He was as good.
Well, here's what happened. He was as good, but they had to throw it a lot more because they couldn't stop anybody. And so it became well, we got to score more points. And he had the huge game against Alabama, and they get beat 55-44 or whatever. But
that was it.
But because they had to do more of that. And so it kept them from doing this where you take off.
Yeah.
And as the quarterback does that, so goes an offense.
Yep.
And when that doesn't happen at quarterback, you do.
I look back to how you would like it to be. Obviously, in the 9 years, Randy Campbell was nobody expected him to ever be the starting quarterback at all. He only lost 4 games in 2 years as a starter, and took them to an 11-1 season in 1983. When he was gone,
Pat
Washington, who was far better than anybody ever gave him credit for. But then it was Jeff Berger, then it was Reggie Slack, then it was Stan White, and it was, as you say, one guy building on another guy.
And it was starter first year, second year.
Right.
Jeff Berger gets better from 86 to 87. Reggie Slack gets way better from 88 to 89. Because you're in a system, you're doing those things.
I mean, Damian Craig didn't start till his third season at all.
Correct.
And he's one of the best, in my opinion, one of the best quarterbacks I've ever seen at all.
Yep.
And but he couldn't get around Patrick Nix, who was not nearly as talented, but probably I would guess had a lot of what the coaches talk about Peyton Thorne having. He knew what he was seeing.
Yeah.
And what he was supposed to do against what he was seeing.
Yeah. And so, now you're right. How much can you do that this season? It's second year for Peyton Thorne. It's a little bit different offense, but if
some people, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, just saying, if you can build on, because you look back last year and you go, it wasn't terrible, even though you look at the numbers and you go, it wasn't a terrible season. No. Could it have been better? Absolutely. You go take some steps this year and run the football as an offense and do these things. And you're right. Heck, you're that close to winning 9 games last year. How much more will it take for you to do that this year? Is your defense going to be there's still a lot of questions, but
and you got to go.
You got an opportunity to take some steps
on the road to Georgia and Alabama, and you look at Georgia. Georgia has been undefeated in the regular season for 3 straight years. That's amazing in this league.
Yeah,
it's amazing. The only 2 games they've lost, I think I saw they're 44-2, and the 2 losses were to Alabama and
in the SEC championship game.
SEC championship game.
Or one in the national championship game, right?
Well, that's not last.
That was before.
Yeah, that's before.
Yeah.
I mean, look what Kirby Smart has done, and that's kind of changing the subject. But you can like him or love him or whatever, but I don't know of anybody that's ever had a 3-year run quite like that. I know Bryant never had one like that. Nick going undefeated was unusual for Nick Saban. He didn't usually go undefeated. He usually lost a game somewhere along the way, just like last year. They lost to Texas, and then they won the rest of them. But I just think as you move forward, and obviously there's going to be a quarterback next season that's got to learn, and people are going to fuss because if they don't give whoever the backup is significant reps, but if you're in a close game, you don't put a quarterback in to get him some reps. I mean, your mission is to win the game.
Correct.
And now you have what you need to do is in those games where you're clearly superior is
Put your foot on the gas. Put your foot on the gas and
get the issue decided, and then let the quarterbacks play. And if that means you're instead of winning 49-0, you win 38-14, well, that's okay. Doesn't matter. And it's good. It's going to be very interesting to see how the backup quarterback race goes. Another thing is you never know. I mean, Peyton Thorne could get hurt against Alabama A&M, and somebody's got to be ready to play. And I have no idea who that is, but I just think, I guess the bottom line of what I think is that with Hugh Freeze and his guys, there is a lot better chance to get to a time, and I'm not saying they're there yet, like what we were talking about in the 1980s. This guy's done. There's somebody sitting here ready to take his place. That's harder now because you got to convince those other guys to wait instead of going off somewhere where they can play quicker.
Yep. I mean, it is harder now, and that's, you and I talked about it today, Phillip, at the facility. Like, it's, people, a quarterback becomes the forgotten guy when the new recruiting gets exciting. Like, even a guy like a Holden Gertner, he's not as highly rated as Walker White was. He's not as highly rated as a 2025 like a Deuce Knight that Auburn is trying to get, but he's still a guy who's hung around and has continued to develop. And you're right. In a perfect world, you would just couple years, take the reins. Couple years, take the reins. Right. It's the perfect world that Texas is attempting to accomplish by getting Arch Manning was all everything, and then he sits behind Quinn Ewers, who could be the best quarterback in the SEC.
That's probably a unique situation, just because. And I don't know Peyton very well. I don't know Eli very well. Certainly never met Arch, but I do know Archie Manning well, and that's just that the way he views things and his family. I'm not surprised that Arch has been willing to do that.
Yeah, but to that.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say to that point about it's tough to do, but the best teams are going to have to do it, and Freeze is going to have to do it. Like Walker White was the number 5 quarterback in the class, I think, in 2024. I don't know how highly rated Deuce Knight is, but I know he's like close to 5-star status. Freeze is going to try to get one every year. And it's like, because they don't want to be stuck in the situation where they're relying on a transfer. And I think maybe that is, we're talking about what the offense needs to do moving forward into the future to become more consistent. Just getting a really good quarterback every year and sticking him in a system that's consistent that'd be a decent place to start.
That's a pretty good place.
The place to start is having more than one. That's the place to start, because what you want is you want competition.
And when you have more than one, that other guy is sitting there ready to go.
Correct. And what they do is, and because we can go back to the root of everything in all of this, in my opinion, since 2013, you can go back to 2010, has been that far too often Auburn said, "Well, here's our guy at quarterback."
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's it. Then you get a guy in a couple more years. But you can't do that.
And the other thing,
get a guy and go in the next year, say, I'm going to get a guy better than that guy. He might not beat him out, but I'm going to go get a guy I think's better than him, and then he's going to have to beat him out.
Right. You look at the 2010 team; they had a bunch of really good offensive linemen, and you look at the 2013 team; they had they had 160 something starts going into the national championship game, and they had the number 2 player picked in the draft. Greg Robinson didn't do what I'm sure he hoped to do in the NFL, but he was a monstrous college offensive tackle. Now I can tell you, he was great, and it's hard to succeed. It was hard 50 years ago. And it's still hard today to succeed if you can't win on the offensive line. It's just hard to do. I mean,
and that's been, you look at quarterback, offensive line, those are the two spots where they didn't. I mean, you go, well, they've still recruited. Yeah, they've recruited a few of those guys, and but you got to have one after the other. I mean, because you go back to it, Georgia and Alabama go, man, look at the quarterbacks they've had. Well, yeah, well, look at the ones that didn't pan out.
Oh yeah,
the Woods are full of the guys that were 4- and 5-star quarterbacks at Alabama in Georgia the last 10 years that didn't make it. There's a bunch of those guys. Same for offensive line. You go, and think about all the offensive linemen those teams have produced. Okay, well, what about the 45 that didn't? Because they knew you got to have a bunch of those guys. You got to bring a bunch of them in.
I think there's
probably 4 offensive linemen and get 4 starters. It's just not the way it works.
I'm betting that if you look at recent history or however long since they've been giving star ratings to players, that there's probably been more 5-star busts at quarterback than any position.
It's probably quarterback and offensive tackle. That's probably offensive line. Those are the 2 spots that are the most difficult to recruit. That's why you have to keep getting more of them, because you're going. I mean, look at the NFL. Look at the NFL and you go, how many first-round quarterbacks didn't make it?
Right.
And they're only looking at 2 guys, maybe 3. They got the entire board, and they're going, we're down to 2 or 3 guys, and they still miss it. That's how hard it is. That's why you have to have a bunch of them and create competition, because you may be the greatest looking, unbelievable athlete, throw it 100 yards, but he might not be able to play quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many players I've had say to me that the one thing when you get here is they're trying to recruit somebody better than you to take your place. That's just the truth.
That's
it. We said that all last season.
Yeah, that's what you better be doing, and it wasn't done enough for the last decade at all.
Well, especially on the offensive line, and Jason, you and I both think a whole lot of Gus Malzahn. I know I do.
Yes,
but his seeming thought that he could just go get a couple of transfers on the offensive line every year, and a couple of them worked out.
Mm-hmm.
Jack Driscoll was one, as you said, but he just never went all in on recruiting offensive linemen. He just never did, and I'm not sure why. And but maybe he's doing it different now. I don't know, but it was just a thing, and I don't know why. And because, like I said, it was true when they were running the wishbone. It was true when they were running the single wing. You better have a good offensive line if you're going to win.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, Jason, like just these couple examples of teams that we've been talking about, it just comes to mind for me. I can't recall every quarterback that was there, but I remember Alabama had a really good run in the middle of Saban's tenure. I mean, they were always recruiting good quarterbacks, but 2015, it was like Barnett, Cornwell, something like that. I mean, they were correct. They had a bunch of like built up top 50 guys. And then Jacob Coker, who was like a kind of middle of the road transfer guy.
He was like a 3-star signee.
Right. Wins the championship with them. Georgia just a few years ago. And I'm picking here from like the most talented teams of the past couple decades in college football. But like point being, Georgia has, I mean, a guy like a Vandergriff, somebody else I'm not thinking of, but like 4 or 5-star quarterbacks.
And they can't beat out Stetson Bennett.
And it's the former walk-on. And so while that is sort of an extreme example because those guys had NFL players all over the place, it is to Jason's example of what Auburn, what everybody is going to try to do. And that's get a good quarterback every class and just try to get a better one the next class.
I went and looked at Alabama, the Alabama 2015 Alabama football roster: Blake Barnett, Cooper Bateman, Jacob Coper, David Cornwell, Alec Morris. Yeah, that's all those guys were highly recruited, highly rated. All those,
and you know, these days you're going to probably lose some of those guys.
Yeah, they lost a lot of those guys.
Yeah, that's why you keep bringing them in. That's why you keep bringing them in.
Yeah, that's why I was saying about it, because it's hard. Coaches have told me both of these things about how difficult it is to evaluate a quarterback playing in high school. I mean, you can evaluate his speed and his arm strength and all those kinds of things. But when you get to this level, playing quarterback's a whole different matter than what you've ever done. And the same thing's true on the offensive line. I think maybe even more so, because if I'm a 295-pound offensive tackle with talent, and I'm playing against a 220-pound defensive tackle in high school, well, I'm going to bury him. And but that doesn't prove you're going to be able to do it when that other dude on the other side of the line also weighs 290 and he's real fast. So I feel for coaches, because as excited as you get about recruiting, and they're excited about it, fans are excited about it, but you still don't really know. You just don't really know until they show they can do it at this level.
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with need too, what position they're coming in at. Like a guy like Cam Coleman. I mean,
well, Cam Coleman is probably a freak. I mean, there are guys that just come in and they're mature enough and physically ready and they're smart. They pick it up and they take right off. But there are also guys that don't get it for a year or two, and then they take off. So, but again, now it's so hard now because people can leave at any time. So, and I asked Derek Nix about that today, Thursday, and he said it's relationships. He said you got to have the kind of relationship with them that you can tell a guy, here's why you're not playing, and here's what you need to do to change that. And he said, and if they trust you, they'll understand and they'll listen. He said, so it's about developing those relationships from the start so that they do trust you. But there's still going to be guys that say, well, that may well be, but I want to play, so I'm leaving.
I was reminded of it today that Cam Coleman doesn't turn 18 until next Wednesday.
Really? I didn't realize that, man.
Yeah. Yeah, because Marcus was laughing about, he said he overheard behind him talking about Perry coming in this fall, and they did a drill, and Perry maybe messed it up a little bit. And he said he heard behind him, he heard Cam go up to him and say, hey, man, I know how you feel. That was me in the spring. Here's what you got to do. And Marcus was like, here's a 17-year-old being like, hey, man, here's what you got to do to go through this drill. Like, I mean, it's unbelievable.
The thing I think about the receivers is that, it's not like they're going out there to play only freshmen. They got Lewis. They got the other two.
Yep. Sam Jackson.
And it's going to be hard for freshmen to beat those guys out.
It is.
Not Cam. I don't think it's going to be hard for Cam.
And that's the thing. Being on campus in the spring, doing what he's done has made him, he's kind of in the – you throw the other three guys, even though Bryce Kane was on campus in the spring, Bryce Kane, Perry Thompson, Malcolm Simmons. But, Phillip, here's what we talked about this earlier this week. It's a different world because they might not beat those guys out, they're going to play at some point because they're really talented.
Right.
And in this day and age, if they can help me 3 snaps and it might help me win a game, then you go play.
There's no reason to redshirt.
No reason to redshirt guys. We're going to roll.
Usually these days, I think if somebody's redshirted, it's just because they weren't good enough, and you get to the 6th or 7th game, they're still not good enough, and you say, well, there's no reason to put him in against Louisiana Monroe or whoever.
I think like the difference in those guys, and then like a DeAndre Carter, where it's so much more difficult as an offensive lineman.
Oh yeah,
you got guys that are older, they're more mature physically.
They've been in that weight program for years.
That's where you see the difference. At wide receiver, you go, man, they don't.
The guys can learn what to do. They can play at wide receiver.
Wide receiver, corner.
And I think largely that's true at running back too.
Wide receiver, corner, running back. Those are 3 spots where you look at it and go, okay. And right now, even pass rusher maybe a little bit. But it's the offensive line. is even more difficult than quarterback for me nowadays. Quarterback used to be top of the line. Now, to me, because of how much more advanced guys are, I think it's more difficult as an offensive lineman, which made what Connor Lew did last year even more impressive.
Yeah, and I do believe that this offensive line is going to be a good bit better than last season's offensive line. And Jason Jones convinced me yesterday that they've got like 10 great defensive tackles. So
they've got a lot of guys.
Yeah.
And you find a couple of guys that turn into dudes. That'll be
that's it.
Yeah, that may ultimately determine, no matter how good the offense is, if they can find those few plays they need to win a couple more games.
Yep.
Yeah, I put it in the notes, Jason, but like it's interesting to watch, and this is every coach is going to be like this, I think, but Von Trell's King Williams sort of talking about the plan for these guys at practice the other day. Not accepting any complacency on their part, because I think that is going to be the plan. And people say that, oh, you love to have depth on the line of scrimmage, but this is the first year at Auburn I can remember in a little while where that needs to be the blueprint, just because of the way the circumstances are, and because of, like we just talked about, there's a lot of different guys there. I just don't know right now. Maybe we'll see. Separation's going to start. Camp keeps on rolling. Things are getting important. I don't know how much separation there is between like number one, other than Keldrick Falk, maybe aside, the defensive tackles, number one defensive tackle and your number 5 guy. Like, is he that much better? So you're saying, hey, you might only get 20, 25, 30 snaps a game, but you better go out there and play your guts out.
Well, I think really probably 30 to 40 snaps is about the optimum number of snaps for particularly an interior defensive lineman to play. If you got to play 60 or 70 snaps, you're going to be and you weigh 295 pounds, you're going to be sucking some wind when you get to the fourth quarter.
Yeah,
that's what Marcus Harris had to do.
Like when you weigh 325 pounds, it makes it even more difficult. And
what he did last year was,
well, I mean, it's been a run. Marcus Harris the year before, he was more, but Colby Wooden was that guy the year before. He played so many snaps, and so that's what you want to avoid. Now, if you've got a guy like that, you want him to play more like Keldrick Falk. If Keldrick Falk's turned into that guy, he's still going to play more snaps than anybody else. But you don't want to look up at the end of the year and have a guy playing 78% of the snaps on a defensive line. That makes it really hard for that
when
guy.
You talk about those great teams we were talking about, they don't have anybody doing it.
They didn't have that. You didn't know.
And the difference is that there wasn't that much difference when they weren't in there.
Yes.
And that's the key. Not just depth, not having numbers, but do you have numbers of guys that can go out there and hold their own in the toughest league in the country?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, we're only a couple years removed from Zacoby. I think it was Zacoby and Owen, and it was like ungodly percentage of. I think Owen Papo his last year played like 95% of every defensive
season. They didn't have but 2 linebackers.
Well, that was it. You had Owen and Derek Hall and Colby Wooden were on the field 75% of the time.
And Roger was on the field like 99%.
And so,
Rabbit.
Yeah, those are the things you want to avoid.
Right.
And this will be the first time in several years where this is a team that can do that on both sides of the ball. You can withstand an injury or two. Obviously, there's some key spots: running back, corner, where you need to stay healthy, quarterback. But like most everybody else, you throw quarterback into the mix when you talk about that anyway. But lines of scrimmage, even secondary wise, athletically, you're good. Wide receiver, you've got numbers for the first time in quite a while, and so
right. And that's kind of remarkable when you think back to what was there.
Yeah.
When Hugh Freeze arrived in December of 2023, I guess 2022, December.
Yep.
They've done a remarkable job of just restocking things, just having more guys that can play, and because it was, if you told me in that December when you got here that we had even 7 games, I'm not sure I would have believed you, and they wouldn't have if they hadn't really just gone to the transfer portal so hard that year.
We're just a few weeks away from 2 years. Oh, well, I take that back. But 2 weeks away from year number 2 of Hugh Freeze.
Right.
21 some odd months, 20, something like that. You know, I mean, offensive linemen are on this roster that were on the roster the day he was hired.
I mean,
3. 3.
Well, didn't you say that there were like 19 players that on the entire roster?
Yeah, there's not many. Tate Johnson, E.J. Harris, Jeremiah Wright. That's so no.
I'm looking for Jeremiah Wright to bust out this season.
Yeah, I think he's set up for a really good year.
He's to be honest, it's been kind of mystifying to me that he was never really able to get to be the guy.
Injuries and moving back and forth. I mean, he's played defensive line 3 different times, had a knee injury, and then had another injury. That this is the first full year he's had, and I think that's going to be a big deal for him.
Phillip, close us out here and tell us a little bit about some softball news on Thursday night.
Oh, well, Auburn got a transfer pitcher today. She's from Cal State Fullerton, and she was the Big West Pitcher of the Year. She won 19 games and had a 1.68 ERA, and had about 4 times as many strikeouts as walks. I'm told that she's got a chance to be the real deal. And they got another commitment from 2025 commitment earlier in the week from Haven Roebuck. She's from North Carolina and was apparently really highly recruited, a good player. Speaking of that, changing the subject just a little bit, I talked to Mickey Dean yesterday, and his health outlook is much better than it was. It's not he's not out of the wood yet, but he's in a much better place than he was at the end of the season. And
that's good to hear.
Yeah, I think that that softball season is going to be interesting. It's too early to get too much into softball, but getting the pitcher was a big deal because, to be honest with you, when I interviewed Chris and Kate, they weren't sure they were going to be able to get another pitcher. But apparently, and that's somebody told me this day, I think the Cal State Fullerton coach left, which meant that some of these kids could enter the transfer portal, including this pitcher. And so she's from, I forget where she's from, but it's somewhere on this side of the country. So that could be interesting.
Well, gentlemen, I enjoyed it. If anybody has any parting messages or things they want to talk about real quick, I think
I'm good.
We'll call it a night there.
Just
appreciate you guys.
Just looking forward to we'll talk to Hugh Freeze on Friday, and then get a chance to watch maybe a little bit of scrimmage situation on Saturday. I don't think it'll be a bunch, but
I don't like to have to be somewhere at 9:00 in the morning.
I think camp really kicks into high gear next week.
Yeah.
I think we will begin to get some separation as we get into next week. And my guess would be a Wednesday, Thursday, lock the doors, true scrimmage.
Yeah.
And then we'll learn a little bit more about this team.
All right, guys.
Should be good. Thank you all.
Soon.
Thank everybody for listening.